good evening, everyone, and welcome to International Photography Hall of Fame's virtual event, Inspiration and Insight, a conversation with Keron Psillas. I know we have a lot of people on tonight, so it'd help out if everyone can stay muted during the course of the presentation. As Elizabeth mentioned earlier, there will be a question and answering session toward the end, so we should have plenty of time for all your comments and questions at that point. But before we jump into the class, I'd like to highlight a couple of upcoming IPHF programs. On April 24th, let's see, Carly Sullins will be joining us for Learning from the Masters, using historic photography to inspire your work. Carly will explore how iconic photographers shaped the art of vision, composition, and storytelling with tools that are just as relevant today to your own photography. Whether you're a seasoned photographer or just starting out, this lecture will offer fresh insights into your own work. And then on May 1st, we will have Ekphrastic Adventures, and pardon me if I'm mispronouncing that, writing in response to photography with the renowned photographer and writer John Paul Caponegro. John Paul will guide us in using creative writing to deepen our connection to photography. Whether through poetry, micro-essays, or reflections, you'll gain new ways to engage with art through words. Also, don't miss, we will be having a live stream announcing the 2025 Hall of Fame class of inductees. That'll be on April 10th at 6 p.m. Central Time. So we'll be joined by special guests, including a few of the honorees from this year's class, for an exciting preview of the upcoming gala. And finally, wanted to mention IPHF will also be hosting a couple upcoming multi-day workshops from tonight's guest, Keron Psillas, excuse me. And we'll be posting more details in the coming weeks on these classes, but we're currently looking to host them either in St. Louis or Indianapolis in late September or early October. So for more information on these programs, be sure to visit iphf.org. Now, for tonight's event, we'll be joined by Elizabeth San Juan, who will be hosting tonight's conversation with our special guest, Keron Psillas. Elizabeth is the director of the board at IPHF and also an accomplished visual artist whose work highlights the universal connections between people, landscapes, and cultures. Her long-term projects focus on personal and cultural exploration, as well as preserving our shared cultural and environmental heritage. Thank you for Elizabeth. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen, and welcome, everybody. I am so excited for this evening. I'm just going to say very quickly that I met Keron many, many years ago at Arthur Myerson's. We had a reunion in Whidbey Island, and that's where I first met Keron. And then as I wore my gallerist hat, brought her body of work to Florida, exhibited her work, and then we became fast friends. She's actually taken me under her wing and made me put on my big girl pants and do my first photo fest. So she's been a great inspiration and mentor for me. And I cannot say enough about her, but I don't have to. Her work will speak for herself. So without further ado, I would love to introduce my dear friend, brilliant artist, and a fabulous human being, Keron Psillas.
Elizabeth, thank you. That's too kind, but I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to be in conversation with you, and hopefully in a little while, conversation with all of our guests tonight. And so I'm just going to jump right into it. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for offering me this time out of your lives. Giving someone your time is the most precious gift that we have, and I thank you for that. And so I've been asked to speak about inspiration in photography. And to do that, I put together a slideshow, of course. And in the beginning, there are a few little bits of words, but once we get past all the words, we're going to jump into imagery. And I am going to attempt to weave all of the words that we heard in the beginning into the images. So I'll go ahead and share. How are we looking screen-wise, everybody?
Looks good.
Okay. And so in coming up with the title, Elizabeth and I talked, and again, I want to mention that word inspiration. But creating inspiration is one thing, maintaining inspiration is another, and I've added purpose in our photography. For me, creating, maintaining, and integrating purpose has always been the long-term project. When I talk to my students about discovering their projects, the first thing is, how do I do it? What should my project be? And I have a couple of answers that I give them, and that is that integration should be the first consideration, integrating strengths, your other creative endeavors, interests, community activities, passions. And then we have to think about, does our project have a visual appeal? Does it have something to say? And even more importantly, does it say something about you as a photographer? The best photography reveals as much about the photographer as it does the subject that they're making a photograph of. And it's the most interesting part for your viewer. If they feel that they've walked away and they've learned something about you, the artist, after they've seen an exhibition or read a book or had a slideshow with you. And then I think always in relation to the project, who is your ideal reader or viewer? This is a thought that perhaps is new to you, perhaps it's not new at all. What do I mean by that? We want to, as we're creating a project, as we're creating a book, or just in the middle of creating photography for a long-term project, if you set your bar high to who you want to have be your ideal reader or viewer, then you will always be reaching for finer work, for deeper work, for work that resonates. But resonates with who? Your ideal reader or viewer. How do we sustain our projects? Commitment is a big word. It's a scary word. And it's a demanding word. Long-term projects require deep commitment. And so you must be passionate about your subject. Can you sustain your project financially? Can you sustain it emotionally? Can you get to it? Meaning, do you have the ability to travel? Do you have the time? And lastly, are you investing in yourself? A commitment to ourselves as artists is incredibly important. Are you taking workshops that might augment your knowledge or fill in gaps where there might, you might be a little thin? Are you attending portfolio reviews? Are you spending time as a student? And I don't mean forever pursuing workshops. I don't mean that. Spending time as a student for me has meant, am I going to art galleries? Am I investigating new work? Am I discovering new photographers? Am I engaged in life outside of my photography, but that helps to sustain my own work? In other words, am I filling the tank with inspiration? And inspiration comes from so many different places in our lives. This quote from Ralph Steiner has always meant a lot to me. Doing original work means that we are mining ourselves and bringing up what is personal. And then collaboration. We all have connections in our lives that are meaningful. You must think about yours. Who is your collaborator? Is it a mentor? Is it a fellow photographer? A writer, perhaps? A board member of an organization that is important to you? Collaborators can be so many different, come from so many different areas. The one most important thing is that you must have a shared aesthetic, or they must have a genuine appreciation for yours. This is key. What I mean by a genuine appreciation is that they're not, if they're another artist, for example, that your collaborator is not invested in making you look like them. In other words, they're invested in making you the best version of yourself. That's your collaborator. And then after I was thinking about this, I thought we must add clarity of concept. That clarity of concept, where does it come from? Integration, certainly. We are all multidimensional beings. And the integration of as many of those dimensions will yield a deeply meaningful project. For example, I spent 30 years as a riding student with a French classical dressage master. And then I started making photographs of horses. And then I started collaborating with Dominique to publish books. And so the books came from my life in printing and publishing, which was 20 years of hard work before I ever thought about being a photographer. So those dimensions then were all coming together to create a meaningful project, which is the first one that we're going to take a look at. But the clarity of concept has to originate from all of those dimensions and from deep thought about the common threads, the relationships, and what you want to say with your project. Now, this is not going to happen when you say, oh, I want to do a project on, Elizabeth and I were just in Japan, so I'm going to say foxes in Japan. And my concept is A, B, C, and D, and it adds up and we get all the way to Z. That does not happen in like a light bulb moment. It takes time, and it takes that deep thought that I've been speaking about. Now, I do want to say that short-term projects keep us engaged visually and happily creating, and they keep us visually agile, as my friend Charlie Waite says. But if you were involved in short-term projects, I want you to think beyond subject. I know a lot of photographers who have buckets in their Lightroom library or in their, in where they're storing their images. And those buckets might say dogs, they might say cats, they might say trees, they might say sunsets, they might say, waterfalls, obviously subjects. But I would like for you to think beyond subject. Think about ideas. And ideas, I mean, gosh, the list is infinite. Light and shadow and form and shape and volume and void and movement and mood declaration. It's a really good one. It just came up the other day. Silence, photographs of a period, modernist, pictorialist, photographs in a simple palette, copying the masters. I'm always thrilled when I've made a photograph and I look at it and I think, oh, that came from a Manet painting, that I can remember and draw that thread straight back. So as we're thinking about short-term projects or out photographing, and people say, well, I don't know what to photograph, I'm not inspired. Think about these ideas rather than subjects. And as you're working on your long-term project, be sure that there is something to endure. Longing, loneliness, questioning, doubt, resistance, deprivation, boredom sometimes, although I don't often experience boredom, and then doubt. And did I mention doubt? And there's doubt. And in case you had a doubt, there is doubt. Acknowledge that voice and move forward. Relentlessly move forward. So we have 3 projects to look at tonight, and now we're going to get to the fun part of looking at images. And the first one is Cavallo Lusitano, The Spirit Within. This is a fine press edition that was created in collaboration with Veritas Editions. A fine press edition is a book that's done in a very limited quantity with the finest materials, finest clarity of concept that you can create. But it didn't just appear out of nowhere. Cavallo Lusitano appeared because I had spent all of those years, beginning with the first book, which was Meditation for Two, that Dominique and I did, and then writing with Oliveira and Alchemy of Lightness and a reprint of Dressage for the New Age, and then the color work of Lusitano. So with all of that background and with the, at that point, 19 years of photographing horses, I felt just ready to do this fine press edition. In the end, it turned that the book became an homage to my late husband. So of course I had to make it as beautiful as possible. These images in the book are all platinum palladium. Everything about the book is made by hand, hand-bound, images tipped in. We're not going to go through all of them. There are 18 images in the book itself. They represent photographing on 3 continents, as I said, for all of those years. And in the end, when the publisher said to me, I need 18 images, I said, I don't have 18 images to go in a book of this magnitude. And so I ran off to Brazil and made some more. And I had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time period of shooting there and was able to create 5 images that ended up in the final. That's a big number for a book like this. As I said, everything about the book is made by hand. The case was made by Jim Fitzgerald, and it has a handmade, beautiful hand-felted kind of a blanket that holds the book and the separate portfolio that's in the back. Tieton Press did the hand binding as well as the letterpress of every single page. The end leaves are handmade papers from Cave paper, and yeah, hand engraved piece of walnut there that is the plate on the front of the book. It's done in English and in Portuguese because the Lusitano is a Portuguese horse. Remember I said the word integration? So all of my years in the printing industry prepared me to be able to speak the language of the printers, but it also prepared me to have real clarity about what I wanted the book to look like. And I could say with strength of purpose, this is the typeface I want, this is how I want it printed, this is how I want the book bound. It had to be tab bound and sewn, as you can see in the upper left corner there. And then in the end, I knew that the book didn't exist without all of my collaborators. Those collaborators, beginning of course with the publisher, but then with Stan Klimek, who did the beautiful platinum palladium prints, and everyone else that was involved. We created a signature page. It went around the world to be signed from Australia and England and Portugal and all over the US. And that page is bound into each of the books. That's how important collaborators are. And we need to offer them the love and care and respect that they deserve. So, Cavallo Lusitano, a long-term project. Project 2, an even longer-term project. In 2010, I made my first trip into Europe and on into Eastern Europe, not thinking of any idea of having a project. I was going along on a road trip with a couple of dear friends, and as a child and as a teenager and then growing into adulthood, I've been a student of history. And as a child, I read, I think when I was 9 years old, I've picked up a book titled The History of the SS in Photographs. And that sparked a lifelong interest in the history of World War II. And as we were driving through Holland and into Germany and then into Eastern Germany, I saw a sign for Bergen-Belsen, and I asked my hosts if we could go. They were a little bit surprised, but they agreed. And arriving in Bergen-Belsen on a beautiful fall afternoon was visually upsetting, disturbing, because it didn't look anything like what I thought it should look like. It wasn't in black and white. It wasn't raining. There were no dogs barking. There was no barbed wire fence left. The things that we associate historically with whatever knowledge that we might have of the Holocaust wasn't present, but these beautiful trees were there. And so I made this intentional camera movement just to, as a record, a visual record for being unsettled. And further into Eastern Europe, I discovered this marvelous art project by Gunter Demnig where he's taking a 4-inch brass marker and embedding it in the sidewalk where people who were victims of the Shoah had been taken from their homes or from their businesses, most often from their homes, and recorded on each of those markers when they were deported, where they went, and whether they were murdered or survived. This was deeply important to me because after I started photographing, I kept thinking, well, is it correct to make an art project of something like this? Who has anything to say? Do we have any ability or any right to speak about this? And very soon thereafter, I stumbled across these markers. And in fact, they're called stolperstein, which translates loosely to a stumbling block. So I had my answer. So I'm visiting Prague, I'm visiting Theresienstadt, I'm visiting all the places that I could get to that spoke to me without any thought of a project, just trying to make an image. And I came back after that trip in 2010 knowing that I hadn't said anything original or enough. But I was deeply, deeply moved, deeply intrigued, and I spent the next year reading and planning for the return. So what would the project look like? Well, first, thinking about a project, what are the requirements? My gosh, time, commitment, and deep caring resulting in that immense effort, and a desire to have your voice heard. And I have a little bit of trouble with this because for a number of years, I was shy about showing the photographs. I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't know if I had a right to do it. This is a very sensitive subject, perhaps the most sensitive subject that we could touch. But knowing that I cared deeply and knowing that I had put in this immense effort, and what I mean by that is that I spend still to this day a part of every single day reading the history, watching a film, listening to a book, listening to testimonials to build this well of knowledge inside of me that allows me to feel comfortable to go out and make images of what I'm seeing. So finally, after a year, I went back and decided that I could move forward and think about a project. But that project became composites of 2 original images. And this is the first one that you're seeing. I had been in November of 2011 back in Eastern Europe, still not understanding what the project would be. After a couple of months back home, allowing the heat to go out of the images, I was looking at them on the light table in Lightroom, and they started to move, they started to speak to each other. And this is the first composite that I made. So finally, I had a way in to telling the stories that I wanted to tell. Now, I'm not going to go through why each of these is a composite and what part is what. If there are questions later, please do ask me, and I'm happy to speak with you about them. What I want to show in these first 12 or so images from the first book is a feeling. I hope they hold together tonally, I guess is the best way to put that. There are historical, emotional, psychological, and I hope aesthetic reasons that they all work as composites. I have to speak about this image because this was the last image that I composited for what I didn't know at the time was the first half of the work. I thought I was finishing. I thought I was nearing the end of the project. When I made this image, I had this very strong feeling that I was just beginning to understand what I was doing and that perhaps I should start over. In the end, I didn't. The work became an exhibition, and there's a catalog that went along with it, and I'm satisfied with that. But I did have this very strong feeling of just getting to that level of understanding, and that was 6 years in. Okay, 6 years, and at that point, maybe I have to think now, 15, maybe 16 trips to Eastern Europe, always in the wintertime, because I wanted that feeling. But what I'm trying to say is a lot of commitment, a lot of time, dedication. This is the final image in that first body of work. And so for speaking of a first body of work, that means there has to be a second. And why? What is new about the work? What's left to say? It turns out a great deal. I have this renewed commitment to the work. I knew when I finished the photography part in 2015 that there was much more to say. The first part of the work centered on victims of the Holocaust who were predominantly sent to Theresienstadt and ultimately from Theresienstadt were murdered in Auschwitz. But that is an incredibly narrow slice of the history of the Holocaust. And I've spent the years now from 2018, including this year, I was back again in January, to work on the micro histories that exist in every region, in every town, in every country in Northern and Eastern Europe. And so the title now has changed. It is now, the title will be A Song of Death and Dying. In Loss and Beauty, the title came from, this is a little bit in the weeds, the title came from a book that I was incredibly inspired by, titled The Girls of Room 28. And those girls, those survivors, 14 young women who survived Theresienstadt and Auschwitz, survived in large part, their words, because of the creative act, because of the happiness that surrounded the creative act, whether it was drawing or performing or attending a musical concert in Theresienstadt where they were allowed to do this. And they had a teacher who understood that maintaining a free mind, creating, being a part of the creative act would sustain them. And every year thereafter, after the war was over, they would get together. I'm sorry to say that they've all passed on now, but having had the opportunity to meet them, I could hear echoed that original sentiment that I felt about the strength in their life, the joy in their life came from that involvement with the creative act. Therefore, the title, Loss and Beauty. This last part of the work, or this second half, it's been very, very difficult for me to find that sort of hope. The stories that I'm investigating now took place the years of 1939 into late 1942, early 1943. And I've looked, I'm always looking for something hopeful, and I haven't found it. So these are composites from the second half of the work. I'm having the feeling that I must tell you a little bit about even why one of these is put together. And what you're seeing is the prison at hmmm in Estonia, the remains of the prison walls and one of the guard towers. And it's overlaid on an image of a mural in a synagogue in Bobova. And we're all photographers here. What triggered my thought that this might make a successful composite was not only the history that I knew that people from Bobova had gone to Estonia and been part of the work camps there, but the mural here with the graphic detail and the shapes of the houses going up the hillside mirrored this shape of this guard tower that has a completely different meaning. Of course, the diagonals are driving us into the image, and then the wall that's in the mural is taking us off and then up the hillside and inviting us to discover what is painted there. There's an orchard going up the hills, and of course we see the blue as the sky. And it's inviting us to consider the two vastly different experiences of life that people from Bobova or from any of the other, the people who were imprisoned and victimized, what their life was like before attending synagogue and being familiar with this beautiful mural, and perhaps then ending their life in this prison in Rimu. All of this work has taken me to wonderful places. Yes, it's incredibly sad, but having the opportunity to walk into this shul in Slovakia that has been cared for all of these years by a very elderly gentleman now. And no one is attending the shul. The books are still there. You can see how well worn they are. And well, the light was just glorious, and of course the story is unspeakably sad, but these are moments that I'll carry with me forever. There are some photographs that I've made during the project that I didn't think that I would ever be able to composite, and the bottom half of this photograph that you're looking at was one of those. I had this photograph for a number of years, and I worked hard to craft this photograph. I walked the entire way around this stone-covered area that you're looking at. What you are looking at is the memorial at Sobibor, and those stones that you see are covering a mountain of ash and the remains of nearly 300,000 people. Walking around it took, I guess, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, to try to figure out how to make a photograph of it. And I love the standalone photograph. I love that photograph. But still, I wanted it to be in the book. I wanted it to be in the project because it speaks to the tragedy of Sobibor, because it speaks directly to what the killing camps were, that very particular story, but I didn't have another piece to go with it. And I think about these things all the time, day in and day out. Now, I don't go to my computer and try to make composites every single day, but I'm always thinking about them. And not too awfully long ago, I went to the computer one day and I thought, let me try this. I went to another year, pulled out the photograph at the top that you see, which is a photograph of the chimneys from the barracks at Birkenau. It was a very cloudy, very stormy day, and I overlaid the two, and I knew right away that I had created exactly what I wanted to say. So when I talk about giving yourself time for your long-term projects, this is the kind of time that I'm talking about. This is the first time I've shown this photograph in public. I have to tell you this story so that it means something. The bear in the lower left-hand corner is in an apartment in Krakow that's been maintained to honor and be a memorial for a much beloved person of the Kazimierz. And the photograph alone is a incredibly poignant photograph of the bear, and it was one of those things that I didn't know if I could touch. I didn't know how to present it in a way that was respectful enough. last year, I had the opportunity to go into a building near the Auschwitz site that is the SS canteen. And on the second floor, I went into a room, and my guide there explained that this is the interior of the projection room. So imagine cinema projectors, with lenses and things poking out through all of these holes. And in the canteen, although it was mainly to feed the SS soldiers 3 meals a day, nearly 3,000 soldiers, on the weekends there were family nights. So families would come and see movies, or have dances, or have game nights, or that type of thing. And so that little bear has a very big job to do to remind us that while all this was happening, children were being murdered in these camps without stop. These are covers that I'm considering for the new book. It's a process. It doesn't happen in an instant. You have to give it thought. You have to spend time with it. You have to live with it, often uneasily. Remember, I talked about collaborators. I have 2 of the best collaborators I could ever imagine. Dr. Chimereva, Irina, has become a very dear friend. I met her at a photo review at PhotoFest in Houston, and she is writing an essay now about the history of photography of World War II and after, and how photographs influence memory. Dr. Cybulski has been my guide since 2015. He holds various degrees, just an absolutely brilliant fellow. But he and I have been investigating all of the microhistories and going to, now it's more than 34 trips and countless locations, each one having a unique history. And while I'm doing my own research, I rely on my collaborators to make sure that I don't make a mistake and to broaden my base of knowledge. I could not have done any of this without them. And so with the photograph of the bear and the projection room from the SS, I'm back to that feeling now of feeling like I'm just beginning to learn this language, and that I'm just beginning to be able to say what is in my heart photographically. So will there be another project like this? I think the answer is yes, that it's very likely. So what we're coming to now is an understanding of why we do this. And I've been thinking that evolution is the best word to describe that, in speaking of my own evolution and my own understanding of what I'm seeking. And I think that the very best of long-term projects give that to us. The last project, very briefly, Happier, I'm happy to say. During COVID, I started photographing flowers and ice. I love flowers. I've always loved flowers. I've been, I can't say that I'm any kind of a great gardener, but I've always grown flowers throughout my life. And so I wanted to start, I couldn't go anywhere. I was here in Portugal, locked down, and we were in serious lockdown, and I had flowers at hand. And so I started to learn the process of how you photograph flowers in ice. It's not all that obvious. I will tell you that there are many steps to go through, and I did all of this in trial and error. And in the beginning, I was working in this very small form. Imagine a small Tupperware container, maybe 6 inches by 9 inches. And as the months went on, I began to understand what I wanted to say about the flowers, or what the flowers had to say to me, not just looking at them as a subject, but what story I wanted to tell with them. And so the work became more involved. It became, I don't know, perhaps more evolved. That's the best word. And so I named it A Winter Garden. And I continued with that. And then about 18 months later, I started working in a much larger form. I bought a chest freezer, and I got a great big container because I wanted the flowers to have as much expression and gesture as possible. And so I needed a bigger plastic box to put them in. And so the work changed. Hopefully it evolved, maybe even become more sophisticated. And one day I threw a big block of ice into my swimming pool to see what would happen and, how it would melt and what the flowers would look like. And then I started making very complex arrangements. And then more simple arrangements. There's our wisteria ladies. And then I thought about, well, what if I chop them all up and make panels from them? And then I made an Easter bouquet for my mom because I couldn't get her flowers from here in Portugal. And then I thought, this would look really pretty as a scarf. And my friend Jeff Shiwi photographed it for me. And these next two images are in here because I want to show you the influence of having just come from Poland and then starting to work on flowers again. So this is in the winter here in Portugal, and what's available are eucalyptus and the honesty plant, and there's a little hyacinth down in the bottom. But look at the palette and look at the feeling. I mean, I think that you can see the photographer, the same photographer at work that had just come from extreme northern Estonia in the work camps there. Or at least I can see it, and that makes me really happy. And this year I had just come from visiting Łódź and the cemetery in Łódź, which is an immense, immense place. And I was completely taken with the complexity of the grave markers there. And look what appears. And I will tell you that while I planned it with the plastic container that you see and the geometry that you see in the top and the left and the right hand side is a result of the container, having the experience now to know to photograph it through mid-freeze allows for that shape that when it came out looked just like a grave marker to me. So it's the same photographer at work, completely different subject, same photographer. And then last year, I was asked to be a solo exhibitor at the Pingyao International Photography Festival. I thought, wow, this is amazing. It was a complete shock, but a lot of fun. And of course, as we photographers do, we want to teach while we're there, which I was able to do, and have this glorious exhibition. But while I was preparing for the exhibition, I made two images that really spoke to me about China. And this is the first one because I could see those landscapes of, I think it's pronounced Huangshan. I could see those karst formations and the moon and up in there. And I wasn't thinking China when I made it. I was thinking moonlight because these flowers, these white flowers, the scabiosa, photograph beautifully and they look so delicate and they have this quality of feeling like they're lit inside. But when it came out, it sure looked like China to me, as did this. It also felt like Rubens to me. There's a painting by Rubens that it's actually the Phaeton falling from the sky, but for me, it's always had a very uplifting feel. And that's the only thought that I had when I made this image, that I wanted it to feel like it had this upwelling moment or this uplifting feel. And I'm happy to say that it came out, but all of my friends in China were so thrilled because of the orchid and the very painterly nature that they experienced in it. And then, remember that word evolution? So we've seen the evolution from the beginning, kind of in the middle part, and I've been stuck lately because I did want to continue with the scarves, but I couldn't think of the name, and I finally figured it out, and that has opened all of this other possibility for how I want to create what you're seeing are silk scarves. And so there's the name for it, there's the style for them, there's it's another part of the creative process. It's another part of the evolution of where this flower work began back with those little 6x9 plastic containers. So there'll be clothing, there'll be scarves, there'll be upholstered pieces. Yeah. So here we are in conclusion. The how: clarity of concept, integration, commitment, and collaboration. But the why: why do we do this? For me, my answer is creating awareness, creating growth, and evolution in the work and evolution of the self. We have no time to do this, but if I ever get to come back to you, then maybe we'll talk about a marketing plan of all things. But that helps you with your clarity of concept. It helps you with commitment. It helps you to pick a collaborator. All of those things are important. But for me, the most important is the evolution of the work and of myself as an artist. So thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Stephen, and the International Photography Hall of Fame. And I want to dedicate this talk this evening to my dear friend and my very first mentoring student, Dr. Marie Plakos, a wonderful artist. Thank you all.
Wow, Keron, just unbelievable. I've seen your work time and time again, and I'm always left speechless, if that's even possible. But I mean, I don't know which body of work I love more. It is open for questions, so take this opportunity to ask Keron about her multiple projects of unmute yourself and go ahead and ask away.
Please. And thank you, Elizabeth.
I'll start it since people get shy about these things, but I want to say, Keron, that I put it in the chat that first of all, you set a standard here for giving presentations. This was really, really, really an exquisite presentation.
Oh, thank you,
And
Elizabeth.
to see the 3 different varieties of work, I mean, I know your work well also. We've been friends for a long time. I just think it's really stunning and the evolution of all of it. So there's not a question because you were quite complete
Long-winded.
you were quite complete in your presentation, which is why I say you set a standard for giving one, which is really pretty astounding. But I just want to say that they were all it's all very moving. Each one of those bodies of work was very moving.
Oh,
The just every one very moving in different ways and all equally as beautiful. So bravo to you, girl. I mean, I
thank
really,
you.
really, it was a beautiful presentation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You know that you've always been a great inspiration to me. So this is, yeah, this is very special. Thank you, my dear. Thank you.
Karen, I think the process that you go through, just thinking it through and then exploring the project and letting the definitions of it evolve as you try, continue to explore, continue to think. That evolution of a idea into practice and then into concrete things you can hold on to as prints,
Mhm.
and then eventually changing into something maybe a little bit different.
Right.
That's a process that I think is so important for people to think about going through. So
Thank you.
it was a real privilege to get to see you walk through some of that process today. And when you think about the evolution from the horses through the concentration camps to the flowers, we're talking about a well-rounded person in terms of visual interests as well.
Oh,
So
thank you, Stephen. Well, I've been blessed with curiosity my entire life. And from my parents, I got this incredible work ethic that just, I'm determined and I want to keep going. And the
Sammy.
proof, the evidence of that attitude of keep going, shows up for me. And all I really want is for my students to have that feeling as well, because it is sustaining, it's affirming. When we excavate more and more and more in whatever project that we're working on, it keeps us going. And there are rough times, but that affirmation, that sustenance that we gain from putting in the extra effort, it's invaluable to me.
Sometimes that keeping going when you encounter, even if it's not a roadblock, but a not quite sure where you're at in a process, and
Absolutely.
finding that deep kick in the butt you have to give to yourself oftentimes, but
Often.
finding the resilience to go on. And I really appreciate that in you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your comments.
That's one of the things that impressed me about you, Karen, was that once you made a commitment to do something and you started doing it, you carried through almost regardless of whatever roadblocks or impediments came your way, including, and the thing that moved me the most was the fact that you, in the middle of your book, your husband died and you finished the book. You used that as the energy to finish it. And then going to all of the places that people have died in unimaginable numbers, and you keep going through it and you keep, well, surviving it, and then running home and shooting frozen flowers.
Well,
Well,
that's
no. I mean, it's like
self-defense.
but it's a visual feast that feeds the colors and and also I've seen you actually I helped you pull a big hunk of ice with flowers in it, and I saw you photograph it, and there's a joy to doing that you get. I'm not sure, well, I'm sure you get a joy shooting, photographing horses too, but I think there's a joy in your photographing the flowers, and
Absolutely.
that comes through. So when is the walk-in freezer going to be done?
From your lips to her ears, as soon as possible. But that is, when you have an idea and when you have a dream, and for me, it's not a dream, it's an absolute certainty that it will be done. I cannot give you a time right now because it's costly and it's, all of those things. And that's fine. I accept that, but it will happen. And I know exactly where it'll go on my back porch, and it will accommodate a minimum 4 by 6 foot rolling stainless steel table that I can put a container on. And yeah, it'll happen. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and as somebody that has witnessed Keron coming back from the places that she visits to photograph, and let me just say I'm a collector of Keron's loss and beauty work. I have 2 of her prints, and if I had more walls, I would certainly buy more. I am just in love with that body of work. But I am so happy that she continued with her flowers, because she would come home with this darkness that would sit with her for months. And until recently is when I saw joy again in Keron's expression and her being. There was a light that came about her. And I am so thankful that she started, for COVID, and for her to pull these flowers and start working and finding this joy. Because as a friend, it is difficult to watch her go through this emotional, gut-wrenching process that she eats, breathes, and just consumes her. And you could see it through her work and how she speaks about her work. But it's a testament to her endurance, to her compassion, to her thirst of knowledge, to her just to her being. It's a real testament when an artist or a human being just can take themselves and place themselves in a situation like Keron does for the last 15 or 17 years. I mean, it's just remarkable. I don't know how you do it, and I'm happy you found your flowers.
Thank you, my dear. I'm going to give you a clue to the how and the why. There are two people on the talk tonight that I've seen their marvelous faces pop in here. Those two people are Sam Abel and Arthur Meyerson. Early on in this project, I had a group of 15 or so photos that I thought were pretty good. And I showed them to Arthur and I said, here's my project, that I'm okay with this, or, I think that I've created something here. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said to me, are you done? Are you really done? Do you feel like you've done enough? And that conversation stuck with me. So Arthur, if you're still in here, I can't tell if you're still here.
He's still here.
Good. You are largely responsible for my suffering for 16 years. And Sam is here. I can see you, Sam, on top of the thing. And Sam's resistance, his righteous resistance, his correct resistance to me working and creating composites made the composites better in the beginning. They made me think more deeply, and they had to be strong enough to overcome his resistance. In Arthur and in Sam, I have my ideal readers, and I'm the luckiest person in the world because of that. I wouldn't ever want to show them something that was mediocre or something that I didn't believe in 100%. And, images will through the process of editing, I'm pruning images out of this body of work. It's painful. But the clarity that's achieved because of having a collaborator like that, or even just thinking about, what would Arthur say? Wonder what Sam's going to think about this. And it's not always present in my mind, but when I come to that quiet spot and I can, and I'm thinking about editing, or I'm thinking about if the body of work holds together, I have those two pillars, one on each side. And that, you want to talk about joy. Yeah, that's where joy lives. So thank you both. Thank you.
Speaking from the pillar of suffering, I just want to tell you, kiddo, I've known you a while. I think I knew you before you actually started these projects. And I got to tell you, Keron, how much I admire and appreciate your commitment to the long-term project, which you made a big point of tonight. I hope everybody was listening, because those are what I consider real projects. The time, the effort, the suffering you put in, it was totally worth it, kid. Thank you so much for that and for this presentation. Really appreciate it. Great
Thank you,
to
my
see.
dear. Thank you.
I want to jump in and say, I agree that this was a masterful presentation. In less than an hour, you took us remarkable photography and the thought behind it. The thing that I want to reemphasize is Keron's consideration of the concept of doubt. Photographers do not talk about it, but it haunts lives, work, and long-term projects. And I can't think of another project other than I'm going to call it the Holocaust projects, where there wouldn't be, there had to be almost continuous doubt, and that you have sustained yourself artistically, emotionally, psychologically, I think is exemplary and humbling.
Oh,
And I think that you have correctly identified the way that you got past your doubt, and that is your collaborators.
yes.
Honoring them was a very big part of what you said tonight, and I thank you for it. Congratulations, Keron, on a masterful presentation.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, my dear. Thank you.
questions for Keron, don't be shy. You've seen we're a pretty loose group.
Don't mind, I have a rather remedial question.
Please.
Some of the first photos that I saw, I got in a little bit late, but the first ones looked like double exposures, which I think are done in the camera. But you talk about composites, which I know I understand what they are. That's done in post-processing, is that correct?
That is correct, Yvonne. Yes, they are not done. Uh, you bring up a very good point. There are a lot of people doing wonderful work that are doing double exposures in camera, so in the moment. When I'm photographing and when I'm on a journey to do this, I have only one thing in mind, and that is make the best available photograph. When I have a photograph, well, when I've made the best available photograph, I don't think about composites while I'm in Poland or Estonia or Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia. I don't think about that. I'm thinking about making good photographs. Months later, when I'm home, the heat has gone out of the photographs. I've edited them. I've looked at what could possibly be a composite. And sometimes I'll have an inspiration and I'll make one right away, like that week, you know? Most often, the photographs sit in the archive, and I come back and come back and come back year after year and let the photographs, you know, my best photographs from 3 weeks of shooting, perhaps there are 20 images there, and I'll think about, oh, now I can understand that this might go with that, and here's why. You know, I made the photograph of the teddy bear last year. I made the photograph of Sobibor years ago. I made the photograph of the projection room. Well, that was also last year. But the photograph of Birkenau that went with the photograph of Sobibor was actually made in 2013. And so sometimes it takes time for that awareness, that consciousness to arrive. You have to give it time. You have to live with it. Those images have to live inside, or at least in the way that I'm making them. And that's why they are made post-process. They're two complete photos blended together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Well, it's well past midnight, and even though I would love to continue to pepper Keron with questions, she is in Portugal and it is way past her bedtime. So
There's no way I'm
anybody-
going to sleep after this. This has been so wonderful.
if anybody has any questions that you would like to ask Keron before we say goodbye, if you would like to see more of Keron, please drop iphf.org a note saying that you would like to see and hear more of Keron, and we'll make it happen. She will be having workshops in the fall in St. Louis, and it could be St. Louis and Indianapolis, so stay tuned. You definitely want to take advantage of seeing this master at work. And you have her attention, and she's a great teacher, and I can attest to that.
Thank you, my dear.
Are you going to be in Whidbey too?
I'm going to be on Whidbey Island. I have the great pleasure to be assisting Mr. Sam Abel and Mr. Arthur Meyerson again this year. It's a bit of a tradition now after all these years. And Jeff
Jeff.
Sheep is teaching a wonderful course that I hope to be assisting. And then I have my own. I'll have a flowers class. And then when Arthur and I are together in the late summer, I'll have my 5-day class about photography in your life. And so let's hope that that happens. Sign up, people.
Sign up, tell your friends. And as far as for Don Arturo, mi hermano, and Mr. Sam Abel, I'm sure Jeff and myself and many others that have been in their presence and have taken their workshops. There's a lot to learn, and both of them, you know, Arthur sits on the right shoulder, Sam sits on the left shoulder, and like Keron says, they are always in my ear, and I've heard Jeff say it also. And it's a funny thing that Don Arturo was with me I was with him in 2010. and he's still chirping in my ear. So, you know, they're great things to keep in close to one's heart.
Yeah.
Compose and wait, micro composition, the color moment, all that stuff.
Yeah, all of it. Thank you all. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Karen, and get some rest. And thank you so much for staying up. And you know, I'm like always in awe and speechless, and just humbled to know you and be in your presence.
Thank you, Angel. Feelings mutual. Thank you.
Thank
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Be well. Make good work.